This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Before I introduce my guest, I want to talk about travel and the importance of travel. And by no means am I an expert, and by no means have I experienced all there is. Hopefully, in the short lifetime that we all have, I can experience a lot more. But travel gives perspective. Travel gives an awakening, gives another vantage, especially when you're outside your home country. When you're outside your home country and you look in from the outside, it's an entirely different perspective. It's also interesting if you happen to be somebody like me who's looking in from the outside, and I'll be back in the States soon enough, probably some more travel after that. But when you're looking in from the outside and you happen to be somebody who has a podcast, and you happen to be somebody who has an opinion like I do, I find it really interesting that occasionally it seems to upset people. It seems to upset people that I have an opinion as an American outside of America, even if it's on a temporary basis. It's quite interesting. Now, even though I'm the exact same person, I have the same intellectual rigor, debate, honesty going on in my head. Apparently, America is immune to criticism if you're an American who happens to be outside the borders. So even if you happen to see something that's entirely crazy going on, you can't say it when you're outside the borders. This is apparently in some people's minds. You can't say it when you're outside the borders because I guess you're supposed to rally around the flag and never say anything odd is going on. Look, I'm a equal opportunity criticizer. I think, for example, the healthcare situation in America, what's going on is ridiculous, 100% ridiculous. I think smog in Beijing is 100% ridiculous. So, there's equal opportunity criticism to go around. That doesn't make me a negative guy, but I like to see things done right. And when you see things done wrong, why not improve it? I mean, this is the ethos of Steve Jobs at Apple. Why not improve it? Improve everything. Why sit on our ass and not improve? What's the point? But let's face it, a lot of people that do sit on their ass and don't want to improve and are part of the system want to protect that system because they're fat and happy. And a guy like me doesn't make people that are fat and happy happy. Anyways, back to travel. So I'm going to try and do this somewhat fast, and I'm going to try and do it by memory. So these are the stops for me so far this year in 2013. Leaving LA, landing in Tokyo, going to Bangkok, going to Chiang Mai, Thailand, going to Krabi, Thailand, going to Kiri Khan, Thailand, going back to Bangkok, from Bangkok back to Tokyo, from Tokyo to Hong Kong, from Hong Kong to Singapore, from Singapore to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia to Singapore, from Singapore to Saigon, Vietnam. From Saigon back to Bangkok, from Bangkok to Beijing, China, from Beijing to Shenzhen, China, to Guangzhou, China, to Shanghai, China. From Shanghai, the bullet train to Beijing. From Beijing to Phuket, Thailand. From Phuket back to Bangkok. From Bangkok to Bali. From Bali back to Bangkok. From Bangkok to Saigon. From Saigon to Bangkok, and from Bangkok back to Saigon. And here I am today. And I believe in November, I have to make a trek to Singapore again, and I'm going to go to Angkor Wat in Cambodia. which I have not yet had a chance to see. And apparently it is just spectacular. So what does all that travel do? Well, it changes your perspective. It changes your perspective. I mean, here's a simple one. Just the idea of, for example, communism in China, communism in Vietnam. In America, you hear that phrase and you instantly, something in your blood stirs. You're like, oh, it's just bad. It's bad. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying when you're here and you see how a communist government operates and how the people operate and how capitalism operates within this communist form of government, all I could say is it's a lot more complicated and a lot more interesting than what you might expect before you get here. I want to add one more thing about travel and what it does to you, and not necessarily my perspective. This is a perspective from a very, very successful businessman who you should go Google. His name is David Gilmour. He has been an entrepreneur for like 50 years, maybe longer. He is off the chart successful. And for example, one of his most famous creations was Fiji water. I want to play a clip from him talking about travel and the importance of travel.
I'm Robert Frank with the Wall Street Journal, and welcome to The Big Interview. Today we have one of the greatest entrepreneurs you've probably never heard of. His name is David Gilmour. David Gilmour has started or been involved in starting more than 10 companies in your life. You've had really a remarkable life. You've lived in many parts of the world. You've known presidents, celebrities, from Ernest Hemingway to Errol Flynn. You live on 3 charmed islands of Manhattan, Palm Beach, and Fiji. And as I mentioned before, you've started 10 companies or played a role in starting those companies, from Trizec Han, the real estate empire, to Barrick Gold, the largest gold mining company, to your latest, or one of your latest, Zinio, which is one of the top iTunes applications, has more than 5,000 magazines or publications represented, and you've really become a leader in the tech space. A remarkable portfolio of companies, and you've now written a book really offering some lessons to other entrepreneurs, about lessons from your own life, your successes, and your failures. So welcome. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing, and specifically, you grew up in Toronto in Canada, and your father offered you a choice when you were younger that I think played a big role in what would follow. Tell me about that.
That was really the tipping point and what determined me to become an entrepreneur. And as I say in the book, entrepreneurs are not born, they're born of life's experiences. And at age 16, my father called me into his study and said, "Son, I got a choice for you to make in the next 24 hours. You're 16, you're not a very good student, and I think it would be helpful if you had some experience traveling. So from 16 to 25, you can travel every summer on $10 a day and see the world, or when you're 25, I'll leave you a little bit of money, a very small amount, to start a small business." So I chose travel, and that was the decision I loved. But there was one caveat. He said, "Son, if I ever catch you traveling with a friend, boy or girl, the deal is off."
So you had to be alone.
Yeah, had to be alone. So I thought, well, maybe he's trying to get rid of me. But it was the wisest decision, of course, because today when I'm in Europe with my wife, Jill, and I see these packs of kids and traveling in a pack, they may as well have stayed at home because they sit around a cafe and talk to each other. The fact that I was alone, I became an observer. I was listening when I'd rather be speaking. I saw the trends and mannerisms and needs and wants of people, and it introduced me to people that I'd never have met, because if I'd been sitting there with a friend, nobody would interrupt me. But because I was alone, I was how I met so many people. They'd see me alone. I'd have my standard uniform of white jeans, a blazer, and a white shirt. And they'd say, fairly presentable, come on over. Are you alone? Would you join me for a drink? And sometimes it ended up 2 weeks later, I saw things and met people that I never would have otherwise.
And so being an observer when you'd rather be talking, you think that helped you really in your career as an entrepreneur?
Yes, because I think an entrepreneur, or at least with the career that I had, was being able to spot a phenomena, an emerging trend, before it happened. And in your own mind, you have such focus and feeling and passion about it that somehow it usually works.
He's so right. He is so right about travel. I'm not saying, look, if you happen to be married, significant other, yes. But you know what? If you're at a point in time of your life where you just need to go and you just need to experience, don't take anybody with you. Just get on that plane and land and figure it out when you get there. Don't mess around. Don't beat around. Don't plan. Just go. If you've got your laptop, for all intents and purposes, most everything in your life is still going to be exactly the same. You're just going to be at a different location, around different people, different cultures, different experiences. You have to do this. You have to do this. I got to tell you too, I'm a huge fan. You know, I mentioned earlier in the podcast here, I mentioned all the stops that I stopped at, but I am a huge fan of Saigon. Huge fan. There's something very interesting about Saigon compared to other cities. And trust me, other cities in Asia, and I'm just talking about Asia right now, are fantastic. Tokyo is food porn. Awesome. Hong Kong is just vertical. You could live in Hong Kong and never leave a 100-meter diameter because everything is there. It's so vertical. KL, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, this is a place that, frankly, when I was there, nobody would ever guess that I was American. They would run down every Western country that there possibly was, and they would still never say American. So that tells you how much I think Americans, for example, and I'm always speaking about Americans right now, even know about Malaysia. KL, massive big city. Singapore, you just got to go to Singapore to see it. Singapore is Galt's Gulch. From Ayn Rand's classic Atlas Shrugged. At least in my opinion, that's what it is. Wealth is going there. And Singapore is where I'm going to lead now into my interview. Today on the show, I have Fabian Lim. Fabian is an entrepreneur, a very diversified entrepreneur based out of Singapore. I first met Fabian earlier in 2013 and immediately hit it off with him. As we joke about on the podcast, I call him my Singaporean brother from another mother. But I think he has a lot of good insights, really good entrepreneurial insights, whether your desire is to just start a business, do something online, to trade, all of these insights run in parallel. A good conversation. Mr. Fabian, I'm going to jump right in. And what I would love for you to do is to educate my worldwide audience. Before we get into all the content of your life, you are a lifelong, born, raised, bred Singaporean, correct?
I am absolutely 100% born, raised, and bred Singaporean.
Tell the rest of the world, those people that are still in the Stone Age, that have still not yet figured out the wealth that is coming from this small island nation. What exactly is Singapore?
Just to clarify, Singapore is not part of China. I say this again, Singapore is not part of China.
Do you still have to make that clarification?
We have to. Seriously, we do.
Are you kidding me? Really?
Yeah. Especially for the American listeners, just to be sure.
I mean, I guess I could see people getting confused with Malaysia, but it's not even near China.
Well, probably because Singapore has a higher percentage of Chinese. That's why.
Well, jump in and tell me. So why has this city-state nation become what it is, which is just, for those of you that are in America that have not yet got your passport, all I can tell you is this is the gleaming city on the hill that is not currently being built in America. So Fabian, why is your home country? What has happened? How has this started?
I think we have to give a lot of credit to the founding fathers of modern day Singapore. Not trying to be political here, but I think the early leaders, Lee Kuan Yew especially, had the right type of vision for this country, because Singapore is pretty much very new. 1965 independence. You're looking about slightly just over 50 years. So when you look at a country like Singapore with seriously no natural resources, insufficient land, you kind of have, well, at least Lee Kuan Yew and the founding fathers kind of clearly understood that we only had one asset left, and that was the gray matter between the ears. And they placed an emphasis on education. And I think that was what really put us apart from the rest of Asia at that point in time. I mean, we're talking about 1965, basically.
Now, there was also a certain, and I don't say this in a political way, but there's a certain liberal thinking to Singapore, even though people around the world might occasionally hear the headline that says something where they go, well, it sounds so strict. But the reality is it's that liberal gray matter that we can do anything that perhaps was also part of Singapore's success.
I would agree with that for sure. And if you look at Singapore's history from the early days, again, I think, from a political standpoint, Lee Kuan Yew put together, a good cabinet, a good government with really, really clever people who had a passion to want to develop a country. And I'm sure at some point in time I'm going to talk about startups and how startups can be successful. But I do believe that when you put a feel-good man or woman together, you can do wonders.
Let me make it really concrete for the audience out there that still, as we kind of talk about this. And I just wanted to open up, since you're the first person I've had on my podcast in 170 plus episodes who born and raised in Singapore. The airport, it sounds like something simple, but I think Singapore's airport is the best that I've ever been to. And I've told people many times that you could walk into the bathroom and you might say, Mike, that's not true, but you could walk into the bathroom and eat off the floor. I mean, it's just so nice. And there's so much quality put into it. And to get off and to go through international customs at the Singaporean airport, and then to start walking through baggage claim and to see ladies who are working on these airlines come off dressed to the nines, looking like $1 million, so professional. Everything is just, the detail is just amazing. Again,
Changi Airport basically epitomizes the type of forward thinking I believe that the Singapore government had prior to Changi Airport. The international airport was known as Paya Lebar, which was in the middle of Singapore. And I think in the 1980s, they clearly realized that there was no way they could expand Paya Lebar, and correctly decided to shift the international airport to right now, which is the eastern part of Singapore. And if you look at the strategic move that they made, this was the right move because, I mean, if you look at Singapore itself, apart from our ability to survive on our own, Singapore clearly took advantage of its strategic geographical location. And if you look at the airlines itself, or rather the airport, it's being able to connect international travelers and make Singapore even a stopover. That really was a brilliant strategy, I believe.
Well, so listen, part of the reason for me to bring all this up in the beginning about Singapore is that I think it reflects in your way. I mean, you are the consummate entrepreneur. I mean, in terms of the successes that I've seen, and you're very diverse. That's what's, I mean, you seem to have developed this lifestyle. And I saw you described in your book as a lazy lifestyle. I think that's a little inaccurate, but I think you like to have a good time. You like to work hard. You like to make big things happen. So where did that entrepreneurial attitude, can you think back to your first entrepreneurial experience where you started down the path? I know you were a teenager.
Well, my first entrepreneurial venture was a mobile disco company when I was 16 years old. But I assure you then that was for a completely different reason. So in terms of entrepreneurship, when I started getting serious, see, here's the thing. What I realized is that a lot of people kind of embrace entrepreneurship for all kinds of reasons. And it's not always that an entrepreneur has a desire to become a millionaire, for example, or even live a better lifestyle. For many people, if you look at Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand, a lot of people there in Southeast Asia become entrepreneurs for survival. So, they are basically grinding, they open a side cafe, they are trying to be opportunistic. I mean, if you go to Indonesia, for example, Indonesia has amazing traffic jams. I mean, you could be in a car for an hour and not really move more than 5 meters. So this has created a lot of accidental entrepreneurs who basically ply the heavy traffic streets to try to sell you stuff. So again, I come to realize that a lot of people who become entrepreneurs have very, very varied reasons as to why they choose to want to become an entrepreneur. And because of this, the outcomes now come completely different. Some people have formal education on entrepreneurship. Some people don't. Some people have scalable businesses. Some people don't. So I think what's troubling a lot of people when it comes to a broad general topic like entrepreneurship is just that it's very difficult to come up with a one-size-fits-all solution. What's my inspiration? Well, when I discovered the internet back in 2002, pretty much like you, and you probably discovered the internet much earlier than I did. What struck me was the potential ability, to reach an unlimited audience on the internet. So in my mind, at that point in time in 2002, I was looking at skill. Of course, again, this is very different from my teenage days when I was an entrepreneur, because during my teenage days, I was just looking at girls. Okay, so...
Hold on. Has that stopped for either of us yet? I hope not.
Probably not. Okay. I mean, right now, we are probably more discerning. Yeah, but nothing has much changed. So I realized that the online entrepreneur kind of looks at things differently from the offline entrepreneur. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right. I think from my perspective, I like the idea of having customers find you and perhaps become your client while I sleep is the most fantastic innovation of the internet, or one of them to me.
Right. And Kiyosaki kind of describes this accurately, so it depends on whether your model is active or passive. If it's active, you have to be awake, obviously, to generate sales. If you're sleeping and generating sales, then that is passive, and the good thing is that the internet, the way it's being structured, payment plans, having PayPal, having digital products, delivery, for example, allows us to literally create a passive business. And this is where the internet triumphs over the traditional offline business.
Okay, let me jump into some basics, because I think your book really, it resonates with people that have been there, done that, but it also obviously is meant for people that have not yet been there and done that. A lot of new people, let's say whether it's in the trading space as an entrepreneur or just a pure entrepreneur trying to start a business, a lot of people get caught up in this idea of, I don't have enough experience. I don't have the experience. What do you talk about experience? Because I think you and I know it's often an excuse, because if you want the experience, you need the experience. It's there to be had.
Well, you're absolutely right, Michael. And not having enough experience is the same excuse as not having a product or service or idea. They all belong to the same fuzzy excuse category. So the truth is that find entrepreneurship is simply the willingness to take some kind of risk. If you compare entrepreneurship with employment, for example, the reason why people are fuzzy and comfortable in employment is because they believe that, regardless of what they do, because of any risk they take, over 30 days, their paycheck's waiting for them 30 days later. When it comes to entrepreneurship, it's totally different, right? Because you and I know that if you don't add value, you may not have a paycheck within 30 days. Whereas if you add tremendous value, you could become a millionaire or a multi-millionaire, or even today with startups, a billionaire. So to me, I define entrepreneurship as, someone who really needs to be able to take some kind of risk and move away from this typical rat race 30-day paycheck concept.
Let me read, as you say that, let me read a quote from your book that I think is right there in the same space, and I'll let you comment. It says, quote, I discovered that many of my students were using a specific time frame as a yardstick to determine whether they are going to be successful in their online business or not. That time frame ranged from 30 to 90 days, in some cases 6 months. Turns out that many would simply quit once their time frame was reached and they had not yet made a breakthrough in their business.
Right. Well, this quote was real because I had the good pleasure of being able to mentor and coach students on internet marketing. And in the initial years, I was wondering why the fallout rate was so high. I mean, I believe we had taught them a very simple system, a very straightforward system. But very, very soon, I realized that the people I was sharing my internet marketing experience, many of them, a large proportion of them, were employees. And, when someone enrolls for such training, for example, I realized that their mindset was that of, okay, I want to learn internet marketing and I'm going to give myself a time frame, 30, 60, 90 days. And if I don't succeed, I'm going to quit because obviously it's not working. So I realized that, the first thing that dawned upon me was like, why are they having this kind of 30-day, 60-day, 90-day time frame? And then as I analyzed a little bit more, it became apparent to me that maybe they were treating entrepreneurship like a job where you put in effort and you get paid after 30 days. And that's where I'm drawing the same metaphor that an individual who must get paid after 30 days will not be able to get out of the rat race because this person cannot deal with uncertainty, and uncertainty equals risk. That's where I'm coming from.
I think you're spot on. I've heard that for years in my world of teaching people trading. And they often, one of the favorite questions people will ask, and I always get nervous when this question appears, is how long will it take me to learn? And I'm always, I just think it's such an interesting question because how the hell do I know? I don't know how long it's going to take you to learn exactly. And how do you think that just looking at somebody else's learning ability is going to be the same for yours? I mean, we all know, if you look at college, people go through college and high school at much different rates. So it's such an interesting question. And I think you're right. They're still attached to being an employee. And those timeframes are probably the same kind of timeframes you'd think like as in a job.
Right. Right. And Mike, just to kind of share with the listener, the danger of having a time frame is that everyone is different. You're talking about 50 people learning the same stuff and being equally motivated. But at the end of the day, the actual flight time put in during a period of time is going to be different. A retiree who is totally motivated and is just doing this for fun without pressure may put in 8 hours a day, whereas an employee may count herself lucky if she can just put in an hour a day. So time frame is really, to me, really, really damaging for entrepreneurship.
Let's talk about becoming rich and why it's a choice. And you've talked about in your book, and it's a very famous expression, success leaves clues. And you talk about following the trail of the trailblazers. And find the people that do what you want to do and learn from them. Get their mentorship, copy them, model them. And I saw that, honestly, for the first time in the 90s in an Anthony Robbins book, and it really inspired me. And I said this in a presentation over the weekend, is that just the idea of going to where the best are and modeling them. And to me, it seems such a logical concept, but when you deal with people, is that such a logical concept to the vast majority of people, or is it still kind of a foreign idea?
Honestly, in terms of the audience in Southeast Asia, it is a foreign idea to a lot of people with the employee mindset. For entrepreneurs, business owners, it seems pretty much logical. So it really depends on which group of people you are targeting, essentially. Why is it so? Well, I guess a lot of people who kind of lead their entire lives as employees, I guess, if you use the concept of classical conditioning, where they have kind of spent their whole life as employees, they kind of settled down with the notion that, well, I guess I'm going to be average all my life. since I've already spent 20 years doing this, and there's no way that it's so simple as to just find someone who is wealthy or rich or clever and within 3 to 5 days become someone like him. So the concept becomes unapplicable because of their classical conditioning that one has to work hard, take a good job to make a living. I think it's all, I think the self-help guys call these, self-limiting beliefs.
Well, and I saw a quote that you had in your book, which I liked a lot. If they want it, they'll find a way. If they don't want it, they'll find an excuse.
Well, yeah, it's unfortunately it's not original. I found it from somewhere else, but
well, it's all right. It's in your book. I'm sure you sourced it in your book. So
sure, yeah. I mean, the truth is that, hey, I believe that in fact all of us are procrastinators in some way or other, and myself included. I mean, I may be really, really good in entrepreneurship, internet marketing, making money and motivating people and so on and so forth. But I do have my own weaknesses. I mean, if you look at my physique, which is nowhere near your physique, you will see that when it comes to fitness and health, I tend to procrastinate just like anybody else. So as human beings, I believe we tend to want to do things that we believe in and enjoy doing. And we tend to push away stuff that we're unfamiliar with, things that we're not willing to take risks for, and things that we don't really believe in. So, and again, everyone have their own values and belief systems. And therefore, things that we don't consider, things that we don't really believe can give us a path to our own success, we tend to procrastinate. And that's why people are so good at making up excuses rather than trying to find solutions to problems.
I want to read another passage that you had that I really liked. And I'm using these quotes that you and I have talked a bunch, but I just love some of these because they're so direct. The ability to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, regroup, bounce back, and be willing to go back to the drawing board is universal and reoccurring in the entrepreneurial experience. In fact, I've discovered that successful people are where they are today because they've mastered the art of failing faster. Failing faster. It's a great idea. Why don't you explain that?
Well, look at it this way. Everyone has an experience curve. And the problem is that we tend to want to benchmark the next human being when it comes to progress and achievement. So, for example, we're all pretty much going to take 3 to 4 years in college because everyone takes 3 to 4 years in college. Just to give you a real example. So what I found out is that before I took up my private pilot training in the US in 2006, the average person would take, pretty much anywhere from 6 to 9 months to get their private pilot license. If someone took it full time, they could do it in 30, 40 days. But, the interesting thing is that when it comes to culture, when I asked flight schools in Singapore and Malaysia whether I could do it within 30 to 40 days, they immediately told me no. It's totally unrealistic. No one has done it before. And they told me not to rush and plan for a 6 to 9 months flight training program, regardless of how many days I was going to train on. When I went to the US and asked the same question, interestingly, I had a very different answer. In the US, when I asked them about flight training time, they said, well, son, it really depends on your ability. If you are more capable and you put in more effort, you could get it earlier than later. So I posed them a question: how reasonable is it and how realistic is it for me to get my license within 30 days? And I needed to know this answer because, I was moving away from my work and spending a couple of months in the US. I wanted to plan my schedule. And here was a typical American answer. Well, the answer came this: well, son, no one in our club had ever gotten their flying license within 30 days. But if you're willing to go for it, don't let anyone stop you. And I'll be happy to have you as the first guy to have achieved this. Well, truth be told, I got my flying license within 19 days. And my point is that the only reason why I was able to do this was because I enrolled in a flight school that said, hey, the sky's the limit, go do what you have to do, as opposed to having, if I listen to the Singaporean guys that says this is not possible, no one has done it before, you cannot do it. So to me, I think it's a lot of it has to do with self-limiting beliefs. And when it comes to entrepreneurship, it gets more scary because, the average new entrepreneur know to make their first sale, not know when how much the audience is going to part with them, for example. There's so many answers that simply scares the hell out of a typical amateur, and people get scared to the point that they don't even start, they don't even try.
So why don't you talk about the idea of flight, the fact that you're a private pilot, you wanted to go through training as fast and as hard as you were willing to work. You didn't want to hear a preset schedule. You said, if I'm going to spend all my waking hours doing this, I want to get there faster. Why not? If I'm going to work harder. I think that's the attitude you just described about pursuing your private pilot license. When you talk about the idea of navigation and risk and uncertainty, the way that you have to think about risk when you're flying. I mean, there's a whole checklist. When you get into that plane, you have a checklist every time, don't you?
Right, I do. We do. Absolutely. When it comes to flying, and, obviously I'm not the best person to talk about this, but I do have 400 hours. And, the thing about me is that I treat aviation very, very seriously. And I can be almost described as fanatical. So here's a story. I spent a good 10 years before I ever sat in a real plane, basically flying on a flight simulator at home and, kind of doing all the mock checks and flying as if I was a real pilot. And I believe this type of training, even though flight simulation is a game, would probably have saved my life on more than one occasion. Let me describe to you a scenario where I believe had I not have had enough flight simulation experience, I probably would have been in a state of panic. So here we are in a group flying to Australia, and during one of the flights, there were two aircraft that was flying from Perth to Ayers Rock. And what happened was that our team leader miscalculated sunset because we were entering a different time zone. And the plan was to land in Ayers Rock half an hour before sunset, because that's a desert area and there's obviously a big rock which becomes an obstacle. But because of the miscalculation, the sun set half an hour earlier before we arrived. Now, so, unlike the city where it's dark at night and you're flying, in the desert, there is no ground reference. Okay? So you don't see street lamps, you don't see houses. And on that day, it was a totally dark night. I mean, this is one of those scenarios taken up of from the aviation disaster playbook, basically, whether it's John F. Kennedy or one of those guys as well. So the sun had set, and we were 20 minutes into landing. I was on my single engine plane with my friend, who's also a pilot. But I was the only guy who was instrument rated. So in other words, I'm the only guy that's legal to fly this approach without any outside visual reference. Now, as luck would have it, we kind of didn't figure out how to switch on the runway lights. And because it's the Australian system and we were trained in the US, the procedure to switch on the lights was different from the US. And, that was probably the first time I was put in a spot where the feeling of doing an approach, just like at home in a simulator, without any outside reference. And even though I was instrument rated, the feeling was pretty much eerie, I can tell you that. So I did approach, and at the right point when I couldn't see the runway, I had to do what we call a misapproach. And that's what I did, but, all the time I was wondering what would have happened if I didn't have enough training, what would have happened if I didn't have enough practice. Just to make things worse, the airport elevation at Ayers Rock, I think at that time, has always been 1,500 feet, not 0 feet. All right. So someone who got in a plane like mine without enough practice, who didn't believe in his charts, for example, may have accidentally just flown the plane into the ground, because once you descend below 2,000 feet, you are 500 feet from touching the ground. But again, someone with, inadequate experience probably could have made that kind of mistake, because I think only silly guys like us would ever attempt a landing at Ayers Rock, at night, basically, in a desert environment. Anyway, as luck would have it, someone on the ground heard us buzzing around, switched on the lights, and then, I re-flew the approach and landed. And of course, the first thing I did after I landed was to open up the cockpit and kiss the ground. Okay. But my point is that I live to tell the tale because of my training, my practice, my risk management. And the whole context of this is that I'm a recreational pilot. I do not fly for a living. And we have seen even airline pilots, crew of two, under similar circumstances, crash a plane due to disorientation. So, to me, a lot of it, I believe when it comes to entrepreneurship, has to come from self-motivation. And just like flying an aeroplane, risk management, knowing when to take your chances are just attributes that one would either have to be born with or one would have to adopt along the way pretty darn quick, before the whole the whole enterprise falls flat, essentially.
It's an interesting story about simulations. It made me recall a situation. There was a family friend of ours who, way back in the day, flew the C-130 plane, the big old plane. Right. And he had some personal struggles in his life, and I don't think he flew for 10, 15 years. And so he finally cleaned everything up and he wanted to get back to flying, and he's older now, so he used the simulation programs, the at-home simulation programs, to really get reacquainted, and ended up working for the FAA doing all the approaches around the world later half of his life. So it was the idea of getting back and using the simulations to practice allowed him to get back to flying. So I think it's a really accurate story that you talk about.
Right.
Let me jump around on you though here. There's something that I want to talk about traits, success traits, knowing the reasons for failure. And so, right. So many successful people, they understand why they fail. They look into it. They observe their failures. Whereas I think sometimes new entrepreneurs, new traders, they have some failure and they have an alibi for that failure. They don't accept the responsibility. Why don't you talk about accepting the responsibility for failure?
Well, I think we have to kind of put into context the failure philosophy. And for me, having had the good joy of having trained different kind of people, some who are intelligent, some who are less intelligent, some are more educated, and some who are less, I firstly realized that the average person, when it comes to entrepreneurship, fail pretty much because they simply do not do enough homework. One of the key reasons why an enterprise will succeed is simply because the enterprise offers more value relative to the competition. And I find that a lot of new entrepreneurs don't do enough homework to figure out who their competition is, who they are facing, and who they can compete against. And that results to an easy fail in that sense. I mean, for example, if you sell a product out there, not knowing that your competitors are offering the same product with more features at, like $50, and you try to sell at $95, that's why you fail, But so there are reasons for failure. So again, some people call it ignorance, and that's why, in trading, there's a room full of excuses. But ignorance is one thing, but failing to plan, I think is another thing. So a lot of times when people fail to plan, they conveniently sweep the reason for the failure as, some external force, pretty much so. And that's why I think it's a weakness from a human being standpoint, when people are too quick to attribute failure, to external reasons rather than their own inadequacy or their own inadequate planning.
I want to wrap up with, I think, a very important question. And I think this is an important question, whether you're in Southeast Asia or whether or not you're around the rest of the world. You teach students, and you'll have to add countries if I mistake the number, but I know you teach students in Singapore, you teach students in Malaysia, you teach students in Indonesia, you teach students in Vietnam. Am I leaving some countries out?
Oh, Philippines.
Philippines.
Yeah.
So you are actively going out there and giving insight to people that want to learn how to be an entrepreneur. And maybe it's for, as you mentioned, pure survival, or to make more money, or to be the boss. All different kinds of reasons. Everybody's got a different reason.
That's right.
It seems like the motivation, and I don't think 10 or 15 years ago you saw conferences of 500 or 1,000 Asian mops of black hair in a room looking to do all this. It seems like it's the same enthusiasm that I've seen in America over the years of people looking to get ahead. And it seems like it's happening at a really rapid pace. Is the demand to learn some of the things that you know, some of the things that I've seen, is that demand just as really strong as I think it is?
Honestly, the demand is strong, and it's going to get stronger. And I tell you why. Even in a prosperous country like Singapore, everybody's being squeezed from rental increases to foreign labor issues to having more cars on the road, having more people in the trains. People are starting to feel pressured in more ways than one. And the entrepreneurs are getting squeezed. The employees are getting, fewer and fewer pay rises and so on and so forth. So I would say that the reason why someone may want to attend a seminar or explore entrepreneurship, I would attribute more for survival than for their amazing vision, if you ask me. So why is this a renaissance, for example, in Southeast Asia as opposed to the US? Well, over here, we are pretty much like 5 years behind, from a time scale perspective of self-development and self-awareness. But certainly, for sure, in the countries that I've been in and what I see, people are hungry. People in Vietnam, you're in Vietnam right now, they're so hungry to embrace knowledge, change, entrepreneurship. And, they realize as well that the fastest way to get there is to kind of learn from someone. So again, that kind of explains the rise of the interest in self-development programs or entrepreneurship programs. I just finished my program in Singapore, which is Asia Internet Congress, and we had an average about 800 people attend on all 3 days. And this is more than double the size of the same event I did last year. So I can testify to you that people are certainly, in this part of the world, much hungrier and much hungrier to take risk. But again, as I said, I see the reason as why they're willing to now venture when I was already here 5 years ago. What's the difference between 5 years ago and right now? I can only kind of answer it with one straightforward answer. They are starting to feel the pressure that their only game, whether it's employment or entrepreneurship, their only game, they realize that rules are changing their own game, and they figured, I better figure out my life raft or my emergency boat while I'm still alive and kicking and financially stable. But you know what, Mike? The irony of it all is this. As I look at students who have come to me to learn about internet marketing, both brilliant, people who are brilliant in academia, people with good jobs, so on and so forth, I realize that the typical person who would be more likely to succeed, obviously, is the one who's hungrier. So hungrier to succeed. But if you kind of delve deeper into why are these people hungrier, I realize that the people who are hungrier tend to be those without a choice. Ironically, right? So this is typical scenario, someone who comes to my program who is currently a high-flying employee, I would rate him to be a lower probability he will succeed as an entrepreneur because, ironically, he has a choice, and his choice is his good-paying job. Whereas someone who just got retrenched, someone who just got fired even, are more hungry to succeed because they don't have a choice. So ironically, sometimes choice or having the ability to have a choice gives people a reason to not to want to put in their best, and that's why they don't succeed.
Yeah, I think it's a great example. I'm thinking back to when I got started. I'm sure I had other choices. My family had some success. There were jobs I could go take. It wasn't a matter of survival. But in my head, I created in my head the narrative that I would be a failure and that I had no choice. So even though I had choices, I'm not saying it's easy to do this, but I literally created in my mind a no choice situation except to succeed in the world that I had chosen. So I think you're right. Whether it is a purely must-do survival situation, or if you can actually get your brain to think you have no other choice and that you must do this no matter what, I think you're spot on.
Well, just to add what you're saying right now, we are comparing between simulation and reality. And, that's what I wrote in my book in chapter 1 as well, to make your simulation reality, right? By visioning, so on and so forth. And some people are good at it, and obviously you are one of those persons who can, create yourself a hypothesis and play the role to kind of make that hypothesis real. And, I guess successful people who are able to do that continue to become successful, whereas those who are not able to believe in themselves, people who tend to look at life negatively, people who tend to, point outwards as to reasons why they're not successful, will continue to struggle in life. People like you and me, I guess all we can do is to, hopefully share our knowledge, to continue to encourage other people, for them to know that we are all the same, except that we probably just had different drives in life and different types of, desperation. I mean, for example, my book, I clearly said that the only reason why I chose to become an internet entrepreneur was because I was retrenched. I was one of those typical guys that did well in the corporate world. If not for my retrenchment, I can tell you I would not be here on this podcast talking to you. So everything happens for a reason.
Yeah, I gave a presentation over the weekend and I used the phrase serendipity, which is, the idea of a happy accident happening. And I think probably mine and yours life, my brother from a Singaporean another mother. I think it is all about that. You pick the path, you go down the path, you work hard, and good things can happen. I do think you make some great points though. And I hope the audience really digs in and thinks about some of the topics we've talked about today. Fabian, where is the best place if people want to connect with you? They want to find out more. They maybe want to send you an email. They want to read what you have to say, or maybe they want to come meet you or discuss or learn from you somewhere in all these countries that we've talked about. Where's the best place they can go online to find out more?
Well, as an online entrepreneur, I do have many properties, but I think the best and the most universally accessible would be Facebook, on my page, and it would be facebook.com/Fabian Lim page. That's FABIAN LIMPAG. You can send me a message, an email if you want to. That's where I also keep my students and my fans updated on my latest entrepreneurial ventures, whether it is acquiring my new twin jet, getting my jet rating and all those kind of stuff as well. So all the good stuff, work and play, I will update people on my page itself. I just want to end with a quote, which I am now using because I have 2 startups that I am working on, and probably can talk about startups in a separate podcast. But my new mantra is this, Mike: work hard, play harder.
Well, I've seen you do both. So, hey, listen, just to clarify, since it's funny, I've done podcasts from Saigon here now for the last 4 or 5 months, and I've talked to people 8,000 miles away, and you and I are relatively speaking not that far away, and we've not had the greatest connection today. So I want to apologize to the audience, but just to make sure it's clear, though, it's facebook.com Fabian Lim page.
That's correct.
Okay. It was breaking up a little bit there, and I wanted to make sure I had it clear.
Sure.
Well, listen, Fabian, I might be over your way in November, so hopefully we can catch up.
Absolutely.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.